नमस्कार, स्वागतम, सुस्वागतम। आज हमारे लिए बहुत ही गर्व और हर्ष का विषय है कि आज हमारे एनसीएल का स्थापना दिवस मनाया जा रहा है और हमारी इस विश्व प्रसिद्ध प्रयोगशाला की स्थापना 1950 में हुई थी और इन बीते वर्षों में हमारे एनसीएल ने विज्ञान अनुसंधान और तकनीक के क्षेत्र में बहुत ही अच्छा मुकाम, एक अंतर्राष्ट्रीय मुकाम हासिल किया है, एक अपनी विशिष्ट पहचान बनाई है। इस स्थापना दिवस कार्यक्रम में मैं डॉक्टर स्वाति चड्ढा पूरे CSIR एनसीएल परिवार की ओर से आप सभी का हार्दिक हार्दिक स्वागत करती हूँ। और आज के कार्यक्रम की मुख्य अतिथि माननीय प्रोफेसर गगनदीप कांग जी और कार्यक्रम से जुड़ चुकी हैं, उनका भी मैं बहुत स्वागत करती हूँ। कुछ ही पलों में हमारे CSIR के महानिदेशक माननीय डॉक्टर शेखर मांडे जी जुड़ते ही होंगे और इसके अलावा हमारे एनसीएल के कार्यकारी निदेशक माननीय डॉक्टर चंद्रशेखर जी और माननीय डॉक्टर सुनील जोशी जी और प्रोफेसर नांगिया जी, डॉक्टर लेले जी, आप सभी का भी मैं हार्दिक हार्दिक स्वागत करती हूँ, वंदन करती हूँ। और इसके अलावा कार्यक्रम से जुड़े हुए आप सभी सम्मानीय जनों का बहुत बहुत स्वागत और अभिनंदन है। कार्यक्रम को आगे बढ़ाते हुए मेरा निवेदन माननीय डॉक्टर चंद्रशेखर जी से कि वे स्वागत भाषण प्रस्तुत करें। डॉक्टर चंद्रशेखर जी।
Thank you. Good morning to all of you. Again, thank you so much for joining us today with such a short notice and the kind of activities you have been doing on the vaccine research. We're grateful to you for giving your amount of time to us. NCL is very lucky to have you with us today. And Dr. Shekhar Mande hopefully will be joining soon. I just called his office and because of some media friends around, I think he'll be joining a little late. But welcome all of you. I also see the leaders of NCL, the past leaders. I could see Dr. Paul Swami on the call, Ashwini, and many other colleagues on the call. Greetings to all of you. And while I'm new to NCL as Additional Science Director, but it's always homecoming for me to be with all of you. Celebrating the Foundation Day has always been an important event for all of us to look back and see what all the achievements we have done in the past 70 years and the kind of changes we have brought into the system. I'm sure this 71st year of NCL is going to be an important milestone year for the National Chemical Laboratory. I think that NCL is also taking a new path of developing new technologies, both in green chemistry, catalysis, chemical engineering, organic synthesis. I'm sure all the contributions of NCL will play an important role in nation building. While NCL continues to be a flagship laboratory of the CSIR family, especially in the chemical front, there are many legends who have built this organization, and certainly in the last 70 years, the leadership provided by the great people, including Dr. Mashelkar and Shivram and Paul and many other colleagues. I'm sure Venkatraman, which the name I always remember because I've done my PhD with Dr. Ramarao, and I consider myself to be the grandson of Dr. Venkatraman. Certainly, remembering all these legends today would be a great tribute to them and also to the National Chemical Laboratory. On behalf of the staff of National Chemical Laboratory, I welcome all of you to this important Foundation Day. Thank you. Jai Hind.
चंद्रशेखर जी, बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। और हमारे डीजी सर जुड़ चुके हैं। मैं CSIR एनसीएल परिवार की ओर से सर आपका हार्दिक हार्दिक स्वागत अभिनंदन करती हूँ। और कार्यक्रम की श्रृंखला में मैं आपसे अनुरोध करना चाहूंगी कि हम सब लोगों को कुछ मार्गदर्शन प्रदान करें। माननीय डॉक्टर शेखर मांडे जी।
धन्यवाद स्वाति जी। जो कि सिग्नल थोड़ा आगे पीछे हो जाता है, जब आपने धन्यवाद शेखर जी कहा तो मैंने समझा कि आपने धन्यवाद चंद्रशेखर जी कहा होगा। तो थैंक यू चंद्र for your opening comments. Sorry for the I'm just leg pulling. Okay, I'm not serious. So it's great to see Gagandeep with us today in the celebration of the Foundation Day of NCL. It's also good to see Ashwini, who had put in last 5 or 6 years in the institute. And Chandra, thank you so much for being with us in trying to coordinate all the activities of NCL in these difficult times. All the colleagues in NCL, distinguished guests, friends, everyone, it's a great occasion for NCL to be on this particular day. Only the other day we were recounting the glorious history of CSIR when the Honorable Prime Minister was with us at the Foundation Day of NPL. Now, NPL and NCL started almost around the same time, NPL has entered into the 75th year this year, and Honorable Prime Minister was all praise for the kind of things that CSR has done over all these years. I also had an opportunity to talk a little bit to the press little later about what CSR has done over the years. And always when you look back upon, at times, what all of us have done collectively is actually difficult to believe. It's difficult to come to the terms that how much Indian scientists have done over the years, you know. And very often when you contemplate, when you introspect what you have done, and when you compare ourselves with all those nations which became independent 5 or 10 years here and there along with India, about 60 or 70 nations across the world became independent around the same time as we did. But we were unique. We adopted science and technology as an integral part of our development. And what you see today is the consequence of that. Compared to all the 60 or 70 nations which became independent then, what we see today is only because of the strong S&T policy that we did. And NCL, institutes like NPL, NCL, have played an integral role in the development of the country in that respect. Only yesterday we are once again recounting of how the chemical industry in the country and also the pharmaceutical industry in the country has benefited by institutes such as NCL. It's just phenomenal. It's a great thing to be proud of that we are all members of NCL. At the same time, we should also have a caution that we should not have complacency, and our march towards affluent nation is not over, and we must therefore define ourselves priority for the coming 10, 20, 30 years and work relentlessly towards that, so that our population is as affluent as any other populations in the world. Our people are as happy as any other people in the world, and we bring benefit to everyone in the society through our work. Thank you all very much. It's great pleasure that we have none other than Gagandeep Kang here, and look forward to hearing from her about her views on. Thank you all.
धन्यवाद डॉक्टर शेखर मांडे जी, आपके इन प्रेरणा वचनों के लिए हम सब बहुत बहुत आभारी हैं, और निश्चित रूप से आपसे और अधिक मार्गदर्शन हम लोग चाहेंगे। निकट भविष्य में जरूर CSIR की सभी प्रयोगशालाएं आपके नेतृत्व में बहुत अधिक प्रगति करेंगी, ऐसा मेरा और मेरे NCL वासियों का दृढ़ विश्वास है। और जिस तरह आपको हमारे NCL और CSIR की सभी लैब्स पर गर्व है, हम सभी को भी आप पर बहुत गर्व है कि आप हमारे DG हैं। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। और अब बढ़ते हैं कार्यक्रम के अगले पड़ाव की ओर, जिसमें मैं आप सबको मुख्य अतिथि, आज की जो मुख्य अतिथि माननीय प्रोफेसर गगनदीप कांग जी का संक्षिप्त परिचय देना चाहूंगी। हालांकि गगनदीप कांग जी परिचय की मोहताज नहीं है, आप सभी उनसे अच्छी तरह से वाकिफ हैं, और लेकिन फिर भी कुछ संक्षिप्त परिचय कार्यक्रम की औपचारिकता है। प्रोफेसर गगनदीप कांग जी वेलकम ट्रस्ट रिसर्च लैब और क्रिश्चियन मेडिकल कॉलेज वेल्लोर में गैस्ट्रोइंटेस्टाइनल साइंस डिवीजन में जानी मानी प्रोफेसर हैं, और उन्होंने बच्चों के स्वास्थ्य से संबंधित क्षेत्र में बहुत महत्वपूर्ण रिसर्च की है, और उनकी टीम रोटा वायरस और कॉलरा वैक्सीन के महत्वपूर्ण मूल्यांकन कार्य से जुड़ी हुई है। वे विभिन्न WHO की विभिन्न एडवाइजरी कमेटी की प्रतिष्ठित मेंबर हैं, और वे बोर्ड ऑफ कॉलिशन ऑफ एपिडेमिक प्रिपेयर्डनेस इनोवेशंस की वाइस चेयर हैं। साथ ही वे WHO की साउथ ईस्ट रीजन के इम्यूनाइजेशन टेक्निकल एडवाइजरी ग्रुप की चेयर भी हैं। तो आपका मैं पूरे CSIR NCL परिवार की ओर से हार्दिक हार्दिक स्वागत करती हूँ, वंदन करती हूँ मैडम, और आपसे निवेदन करती हूँ कि इस अवसर पर हमसे कुछ मार्गदर्शन हमें प्रदान करें। प्रोफेसर गगनदीप कांग जी।
Thank you, Swati, and thank you very much, Chandrasekhar and Dr. Shekhar Mande, for inviting me to join you at NCL. I think, chemistry is one of the strongest fields of science in our country, and it has contributed so much for all of us to be proud of, that I feel a little, like I'm stepping into where giants belong, to be talking to you about some aspects of biology. So what I'm going to do today is talk to you about COVID-19 and vaccines. So I'll be covering areas that relate to the disease and to the vaccine. And although this is a Foundation Day lecture, I'd be delighted to take a few questions afterwards. So we all know that outbreaks happen all the time, epidemics happen all the time, and pandemics happen occasionally, but pandemics are also predictable. We also know that because of the way that the world is changing, the number and the diversity of outbreaks has changed over the past 30 years. And we actually have an alphabet of zoonotic diseases from AIDS to Zika that came to us from animals, and SARS-CoV-2 is only one among them. This is happening because we travel a lot, we displace animal populations, we remove forests, we promote animal-human mixing, and we are changing the climate, and that is resulting in both zoonotic and vector-borne diseases emerging and re-emerging. Now, if we look at these graphs that are shown here, what we see is the state of the SARS-CoV-2 epidemic in India. This is our world in data for the files from yesterday, January 4th. You can see that India is trending very, very nicely downwards, and this is a trend that started around mid-September. Now, if you look at where the epidemic is really bad at the moment, again, looking for data from January 4th, you can see again that in India, we are not as badly off as many other parts of the world. And if we look again at the share of tests that are COVID positive in the graph that has orange and blue colors, what we would like to aim for is to be as blue as possible. And you can see again that India is at approximately 3% of tests being positive. So it is again echoing the graph that is on top, showing us that we are in a situation where we are much better off than the rest of the world. And if you look at the last graph, which tracks the case fatality rate of the ongoing epidemic, here I've plotted the UK, the US, and then we have South Asian countries and Uganda for comparison. And you can see that in terms of fatalities, the countries that are actually not so well off have done much better than much richer countries. And this is both because we have invested a huge amount of time, effort, resources in control, but also possibly because of demographic and biological factors that might be reducing the case fatality rates in our countries. The kinds of data that are important are classified as confirmed cases, hospitalizations, COVID-19 deaths. And here it's important to remember that COVID-19 deaths usually occur a month after infections. So it's called a lagging indicator. The others are excess deaths during the pandemic, the proportion of tests that are positive, and representative serosurveys. And then there are criteria for assessing the reliability and validity of data. Now, if the implications of this document, which was actually produced by the National Academies of Science in the US, is that in India, because of our federal structure, we have multiple sources of data, and sometimes being able to match data can be quite challenging. Nonetheless, as you can see from the indicators that we have, we really are doing very well. And now looking towards the future, we need to make sure that the data that we are generating will allow us to reliably measure what matters. Now, if we look at the disease itself, on this graph, what I'd like to focus on is when do you start to have infections? We know that incubation period is about 5 days. It varies from 2 to 14 days. And when you start to have onset of symptoms, initially you will have fever, cough, fatigue, anorexia, myalgia, diarrhea, loss of taste, loss of smell, etc. And then it takes some time for people to develop severe disease. So to get to dyspnea in symptomatic patients is usually about 7 days after they first manifest symptoms. And then 10 days is where you develop severe illness or critical illness. And among symptomatic patients, really the picture hasn't changed very much. 40% develop dyspnea, 14% severe illness, and 5% critical illness. But our understanding of what proportion of people actually develop symptomatic illness has changed quite significantly. It appears that in developing countries, a lot of the infections that we see are asymptomatic. But if we think about drugs and the use of drugs, then understanding symptomatic disease and severe disease kinetics is essential. Now, what are the things that we can look at? One, of course, is looking at antivirals acting on the virus itself, but the second is to look at what's happening in the host and how do we look at reducing damage in the host. So these are taken from biopsies of patients with COVID-19, and what they clearly demonstrate from autopsy studies as well as from biopsy samples is that you see a lot of endothelial damage, you see complement activation, and you see both micro and macrovascular thrombosis. The macrovascular thrombosis, the big clots, the pulmonary embolisms were things that were described early. And then about 4-5 months into the pandemic, we realized that microvascular thrombosis also plays a large role in the symptoms that we see. If we summarize the pathological processes, and this is based on data from autopsies and from patient samples, what we see is there is direct virus-mediated injury, mainly in the lungs. Then you have endothelial activation and damage, thrombosis in big and large vessels, complement activation and deposition, and complement-mediated cell lysis. You also see pro-inflammatory cytokine-mediated injury. In the early days of the illness, we thought everything was a cytokine storm. Now that we know that that is not the case. More recently, what has been described is that there is actually a neutrophil netosis. There's hyperactivation of the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, and autoimmunity seems to play a large role and may be an explanation for the long COVID syndromes that we are seeing. The clinical manifestations of severe disease are protein, are seen in adults as well as in children, although in small numbers of people. And it's clear that we don't know the sequelae of moderate or severe disease. We know that there are multiple endotypes, and this is very important for when you need to decide treatments. And treatment really depends on understanding the pathogenesis of severe disease. So if we think based on the pathogenesis, when should we apply what kind of therapy? Well, obviously you want an antiviral therapy that is applied early in illness, and then later in illness, we have to think about anti-inflammatory and anticoagulant approaches. So if we think about host immunity, then vaccines and therapies that are immune therapies need to be applied at the right times and evaluated in appropriate populations. Now, when we started off with the pandemic, we wound up with lots and lots and lots of clinical trials. And many of these trials were really small, and it was difficult to figure out what was signal and what was noise. We've had really only 2 studies that have delivered answers, and these are the recovery trial and the solidarity trial. The recovery trial showed first that dexamethasone worked in hospitalized patients, and hydroxychloroquine and lopinavir ritonavir did not work. In the solidarity trial, again, all of these were tried out, and it was also shown that remdesivir did not work very well in severe patients. Nonetheless, because remdesivir can be used in multiple patient phenotypes, it has been continued in the solidarity trial until a final answer is obtained. Now, if we look at what else has been happening in terms of understanding disease, not from the clinical point of view, but also from the epidemiological point of view, one of the most remarkable things about this pandemic has been the sharing of viral sequence data. And CSIR took a lead in this. IGIB coordinated the collection and sequencing of large numbers of viral sequences from India. There were about 5,000 sequences that were sent in from India, and now we are going to restart with a much larger, we have already restarted with a much larger sequencing program. But in GISAID currently, there are nearly 322,000 genome sequences, and GISAID does classification of clades and lineages, and there are additional tools that are available for analysis and tracking, mostly developed in the UK, but with collaborations from scientists across the globe. Recently, there's been a lot of news about the variants, and in the UK we have a variant that has the has 17 mutations, or at least amino acid sequences that have resulted in amino acid changes in 17 places with 23 mutations. I'm actually not as worried about that, which is shown here, because there you see the N501Y mutation that is in the UK strain that people are worrying about is really towards the top of the spike protein. And it's recently been demonstrated in laboratory studies that even though it contributes to greater binding to the ACE2 receptor, it's not leading to immune escape. There is more reason to worry about the South African novel variant, which is the 501YV2, which has many more mutations. And this, in the data that has come from South Africa, there are 3 mutations that are in the spike binding region. And at least one of these, the E484K, is one that is positively selected. So there is more reason to worry about the South African mutation leading to potential immune escape than for the UK variant. It's also the first mutation where you've got first variant where you've got 3 mutations at the interface between the receptor binding domain and the spike protein. Now, if we summarize everything that needs to be done in order to follow up the clinical picture, look at treatments, really, I think I'm quite worried about how little work is being done for drug repurposing and drug development, because the focus has been so much on vaccines, and we really need to think about drugs because people are going to get sick. Vaccines are not the perfect solution and will not eradicate the disease. When we think about clinical trials, the trials need to be large enough because small scale and poorly controlled studies really waste resources. And for therapeutics, we should be thinking about large-scale trials because the number of patients at each site is going to decrease over time. In addition, from the epidemiological point of view, we now know that there is a clear need for sequencing in order to track vaccine performance. So switching from the story of what COVID is doing and what treatments are available, I'd like to now talk about vaccines and a little bit about CEPI. To start with, I think CEPI was established because of Ebola. And Ebola in West Africa in 2014 actually resulted in 30,000 cases, and it cost about $4 billion in direct costs, $54 billion in total costs. But you actually had more children die of measles following Ebola because the countries that had to deal with Ebola essentially had a complete destruction of their health systems, and there was no immunization during that time. So rebuilding of health systems, rebuilding of societies is difficult. And for SARS-CoV-2, it's been said that an optimistic take is that this is going to cost $3.3 trillion and 5.3% of GDP could be lost over 5 years. So even though we know pandemics are coming, why don't we do something about them? Take the example of Ebola here, where we had a vaccine that was developed in the late 1990s by the Public Health Agency of Canada. The vaccine existed, nobody wanted to make the vaccine. When the pandemic hit, and what you see here is a tracing of cases in Guinea, and essentially it took such a long time for people to make up their mind, for WHO to hold a consultation. It was already 20 weeks into the pandemic that WHO held a consultation on Ebola vaccines. And then 6 weeks later, the ring design was decided, the vaccine was chosen, and the vaccination was initiated almost 9 months, 10 months after the after the epidemic had really started. When they got started, the cases had already started declining. Nonetheless, they managed to do ring immunization. Now in Ebola, it's very different from SARS-CoV-2. If a person gets sick with Ebola, then it has to be person-to-person transmission. And therefore, if you can identify all the contacts of the person and then immunize all of them, which is called ring immunization, then you will be able to prevent disease. Now, because Ebola is a life-threatening illness, the design that was decided was that there would be either immediate vaccination of a ring or the vaccination would be delayed by 21 days. And if we look at what the Guinea trial showed, even though the trial started late, they vaccinated only 90 rings. Even with that, they were able to show that if you had immediate vaccination, you had 0 cases. And if you had the 21 days delayed vaccination, you had 16 cases. 100% effective vaccine developed 15 years before the outbreak happened and could be tested only when the outbreak had actually started off, because no one was interested in making the vaccine. So because of that, CEPI was established, and the idea of CEPI was, can we start to make vaccines before we have an epidemic or a pandemic? And can we make sure that these vaccines are available to the people who need them without worrying about the cost? So CEPI started with Lassa, MERS, Nipah, and then added Rift Valley fever and chikungunya. But the important thing was CEPI also last year funded a program called Disease X Vaccination, multiple rapid response platforms that could quickly develop vaccines. So when the sequence of SARS-CoV-2 was announced, within 2 weeks, CEPI had already funded the first 3 vaccine candidates, and those included Moderna and the University of Oxford. CEPI and the Gavi Alliance now lead the vaccine pillar, which is called COVAX, of the Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator. And CEPI's founding partner was the Department of Biotechnology, which has a parallel program which is called INCEPI, which is supporting many vaccines in the country. So where are we today? Today we have more than 200 preclinical studies, 43 phase 1s looking at safety and immunogenicity, 20 phase 2s looking at safety and immunogenicity, 30 vaccines in phase 3 efficacy trials, 7 that have been licensed for limited use and 3 that have been licensed for full use. And these are the Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca vaccines. We also have 1 abandoned vaccine which went into human studies and then had to stop. And this is the vaccine that used the molecular clamp technology from the University of Queensland. What are all the platforms that are used? We have live attenuated or inactivated vaccines that use the whole virus. We have virus-like particles, recombinant vaccines, vectored vaccines, DNA and RNA vaccines. And except for the whole particle-based vaccines, all the other vaccines use the spike protein either as a sequence or as a protein to be delivered into individuals. And this is because the spike protein is responsible for the binding of the virus into the ACE2 receptor and therefore entry into cells. And it's believed but not confirmed yet that it's likely that a correlate of protection might be neutralizing antibodies to the spike protein. So if we look at inactivated vaccines, there are lots of inactivated vaccines being made by Chinese companies and also inactivated vaccines made in many other countries. The star in India is the Bharat Biotech ICMR vaccine, Covaxin, and this has been through phase 1-2 trials and received restricted use approval on the 3rd of January. Live attenuated vaccines are in development with 2 Indian companies, Serum Institute of India and Indian Immunologicals, in partnership with others outside of the country. And the idea here is to induce lots of mutations into the sequence of the virus so that there will be reduced translation efficiency and reduced virulence. So you have an immunogenic but attenuated virus. For protein subunit vaccines, we have virus-like particles and we have the recombinant proteins themselves. Novavax is one of the leaders in making these protein subunit vaccines, and they are using their own adjuvant. And this is going to possibly be manufactured by Serum Institute of India. The vaccine is currently in phase 3 trials in the US. The Biological E is also doing a recombinant protein. This is the receptor binding domain of SARS-CoV-1, which was developed by the Baylor College of Medicine, but appears close enough to SARS-CoV-2 to be used, and they are just going into phase 1 studies. And Biological E has access to adjuvants from IICT as well as from GSK. So all subunit vaccines are likely to need adjuvants. DNA vaccines, Zydus Cadila has finished its phase 1 and phase 2 studies and has just got permission for its phase 3 studies and will be starting those soon. Similarly, Inovio in the US will also be going to phase 3. mRNA vaccines, we all know the story of Moderna and Pfizer BioNTech. But in India, we have Genova, and Genova is a Pune-based company that is looking to make a vaccine that can be, unlike the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, be used in the cold chain as it exists today with no extra cold storage requirements. Viral vectored vaccines, we have multiple candidates in India. We have the Serum Institute of India vaccine, which also received restricted use approval on the 3rd of January. We have Gamaleya's vaccine, which is with Dr. Reddy's laboratory, which uses a combination of 2 adenovirus vectors. We have the Johnson & Johnson vaccine that's going to use only 1 adenovirus vector, which has been used previously for their Ebola product, and this may be manufactured by BioE. In the meantime, Aurobindo Pharma and Bharat Biotech are also working with viral vectored vaccines, Aurobindo with a VSV vector and Bharat Biotech with a rabies vector. So really strong vaccine science in the country. India's first approval for a human trial was for the Covaxin vaccine, which is based on a strain from the National Institute of Virology. Bharat Biotech is a company that has lots of experience of working with inactivated vaccines. They've completed their phase 1, phase 2, and they are in phase 3 trials, coming close to recruiting their target. And they have obtained restricted use approval, and the vaccines will be rolled out next week. The second vaccine to go into trials was Zydus Cadila, and it's now approved to go into phase 3 testing. And we have the University of Oxford and Gamaleya vaccines. The phase 2-3 for serum was with 1,600 subjects. We expect that their immunogenicity data, some of which was submitted to the regulatory authorities, all of it should be available soon. And they had approval on the data that they provided from their own studies, as well as data from the UK and other countries' AstraZeneca trial. Gamaleya had applied to do a direct phase 3 and was asked by the regulators to do phase 1, which they did, and now they are recruiting for a phase 2-3 study, which will be very similar to what Serum did for the AstraZeneca vaccine. Now, coming to all of these are good science, rapid progress, lots of things are going well, but there are many things that we also need to worry about. And these include trial sites. When disease declines as it is declining in India, then where are you going to do the efficacy trials? And also, once you have vaccines licensed, then can you do placebo-controlled trials? Safety is an ongoing concern because these vaccines have been developed very, very quickly, and the FDA has recommended 2 months of follow-up after 50% of people are recruited into the trial. And that is good short-term safety data, but we also need to be looking at long-term safety data and at monitoring of safety after the vaccines are licensed. We've already seen that with Pfizer beginning to be rolled out, we are seeing anaphylactic reactions that were not picked up during the trials that were being done. Animal models and assays have been a huge challenge, and we'll go through each of these in a little more detail. So in terms of safety, one of the biggest worries was, are we going to induce antibody-dependent enhancement or vaccine-associated enhanced respiratory disease? And the mitigation steps were, can we make sure that we measure a high-quality neutralizing antibody response and a Th1 bias in the immune response that is induced by the vaccines? And fortunately for us, this has been the case with every vaccine that has progressed through testing into phase 3 studies. Animal models and assays are a challenge. Hamsters, ferrets, and primates are used. Hamsters don't get severe disease, ferrets don't get lower respiratory disease, and primates have very slow growth, and the disease does not mimic human disease. So these are problems. even though challenge studies have been done in all 3 of these species. Looking at assays, antibodies for binding and neutralization. Binding antibodies are easy to measure, neutralizing is very difficult, especially if you're doing plaque reduction neutralizations, and these tend to be slow and very labor intensive. And a particular problem right now for all of us is that no 2 vaccines are using the same or identical tests. Everybody is doing binding, everybody is doing neutralization, but they all have different protocols, so comparisons become very difficult, and WHO has just developed standards that it's going to share with vaccine manufacturers for future evaluations. The other big problem is vaccine nationalism, and in the US, there were companies that were selected as Warp Speed finalists, and they were given about $10 billion US for development of vaccines. That number may have gone up now with increasing purchases being made. And yet there was less than $1 million for drugs, and out of that, 450 million was for Regeneron's monoclonal antibodies. Now, all rich countries are buying up doses, and they are in advance, and that means that there's going to be a shortage of supply and very little vaccine available for developing countries. So the COVAX facility has been developed by CEPI, Gavi, WHO as a counter to that, and the goal here is 2 billion doses by the end of 2021, aiming to reach 20% of the population in 190 countries. But a large part of that supply is expected to come from India, and formal arrangements with Serum Institute are already in place. Now, who will get the vaccine? At least from the point of view of WHO, there has been recommendations that there needs to be an allocation framework, that WHO itself, through its strategic advisory group of experts on immunizations, will provide guidance, and then there will be regulatory issues. But countries are ultimately responsible for their final decision on the in-country policy, allocation, and vaccination strategy. And from the vaccine task force headed by Dr. Vinod Paul, we have heard a lot about what will be happening, and this is expected to start from next week. Now, the allocation framework for is going to be really around health, social care workers, essential workers in India, and then moving to high-risk adults. It's anticipated that this will be about 20% of the population. And then if you have additional priority groups, then it will be an additional 20% of the population. And through the COVAX facility, the countries will receive doses that are proportional to their total population, and they'll get it in different tranches at different times. Now, what's the probability of success for vaccines? Most of these are spike-based candidates, and we already have proof that the spike-based candidates work for mRNA and for viral vectors. We currently don't have a correlate of protection. It's likely to be neutralizing antibodies, and there are issues even about the measurement of antibodies because they seem to fade over time. So questioning whether we can measure how long protection will last. But on the other hand, we know that T-cell responses are mounted by most infected and vaccinated people, and they persist for at least 6 months. There will be distribution and delivery challenges, and in the last 2 weeks, we've had this new problem of variant strains that are capable of evolving under immune pressure. So this just tells us that we need to continue to be watchful about monitoring cases. So just to end, we need vaccines and fast. We have 3 candidates with full licensure internationally. We have 2 vaccines in India that have reached approval. mRNA vaccines have proven themselves, but recently we've had information on anaphylactic side effects. The timelines for development and delivery, the volumes are a little bit uncertain, but probably the biggest problem is going to be inequity as a global issue. In India, I think we are very fortunate. We have a vaccine industry that leads the world in the number of doses, and we have 30 candidates in development, 2 of which have already reached approval, and I anticipate that many more will in the days to come. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. And I'd be happy to hand back to Swati.
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद मैडम। आपने निश्चित रूप से वैक्सीन से संबंधित बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण जानकारियां हमें प्रदान की, और जो आम जन के साथ साथ सभी वैज्ञानिकों और रिसर्चर्स के मन में बहुत सारे प्रश्न होंगे, तो मैं सभी को आमंत्रित करती हूँ, हमारे वैज्ञानिकों को, कि मैडम से कुछ प्रश्न पूछना चाहते हैं तो सादर आमंत्रित है।
So I think I can see a number of hands up. Anuradha.
Hi, it was a wonderful talk. I have, a very naive question. I'd like to get your view or take on the long-term efficacy of these vaccines, because generally vaccines take a long time to develop, and we've really accelerated, fast-forwarded the process. So I have 3 questions in this context. One is, how long do you think this protection would last? And do mutations of the virus, will they be covered by these vaccines? That's my first question. The second question is, do these vaccines act differently in populations that are at risk, like between the elderly, the young, people with comorbidities, etc.? And last, do these vaccines essentially just block the transmission of the virus, or do they also reduce the severity of the disease?
All million-dollar questions, Anuradha. Thank you for those. So let's start with the first one. Do we know how long protection lasts? We don't. And we don't know how long protection lasts following infection. We don't know how long it lasts after vaccination. From infection, we know that people who have mounted an immune response have that response at least, it wanes, but not enough to a level where we think it won't be protective, for up to at least 6 months, and so in some recent studies up to 8 months. So what we are predicting is that the vaccines should work for at least a year and possibly more than that. We'll just need to follow the infected individuals and look at how their immune responses are maintained. Also look at reinfection in those individuals, and that will give us a better sense of how vaccines perform. Now, when it comes to mutations and thinking about what mutations can do to a virus, there is one study that has now shown that if you maintain immune pressure using monoclonal antibodies and using polyclonal sera from polyclonal sera from vaccinated individuals, and subject the virus to these over long periods of time, you can get mutations in the virus that result in immune escape. Now, this is after maintaining the virus in the presence of either polyclonal sera or monoclonal antibodies for a very long time. This usually doesn't happen because ordinarily an antibody response is sufficient to shut down virus replication. Now, the variant that has arisen in the UK, and it may be the case for the variant in South Africa as well, may have come from people who are immunocompromised and were therefore unable to mount an immune response that shut down virus replication. So you had virus that was present in the along with antibodies that the host's immune system was generating, and that might have pushed for the accumulation of mutations that we are seeing with these new variant strains. So tracking people who are immunocompromised in whom the virus may replicate is valuable. I do have one piece of good news, which is yesterday we learned that the Pfizer vaccine will work against the UK variant virus. So this has been studied in experiments using sera from vaccinated individuals against the variant virus strain, and it appears to be neutralized as well. So that's something we don't need to worry about at this time. Your last question related to, you also had asked about subsets of the population and how the vaccines would work. We know that for some, where severity data are available, the mRNA vaccines have certainly enough data to tell us that these vaccines are efficacious in an older population. That is not the case for the AstraZeneca vaccine, because the number of cases of severe disease in the elderly in the AstraZeneca vaccine trials is at the moment very small. So we will need to wait for that data to come. You had one final question that I'm blanking on at the moment.
It was on whether these vaccines would block just the transmission of the virus.
Yes, transmission and infection. So yeah, vaccines have three things that they should do. The first and most important is block disease, right? Prevent disease from happening. And that all vaccines have to do. Then you look to see, does this vaccine prevent infection? Does it induce a sterilizing immunity? Actually, sterilizing immunity is very difficult for mucosal infections. But the evidence from Pfizer, at least, and possibly some evidence from AstraZeneca shows that there is a reduction in infection in the short term, at least, with the use of these vaccines. It's not perfect, but there is a reduction. Now that's important because that means that actually the next thing that we look at is transmission, which is, if you get infected, do you reduce the amount of virus that is being shed? So if you can reduce infection itself, it's very likely that you will be able to reduce virus shedding. So therefore, it's possible that these vaccines may act very well against disease and reasonably well against infection and transmission.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kang.
Dr. Shanmugam.
Yeah,
Dr. Shanmugam ji.
Hello, Professor Kang. Thank you again for a wonderful talk. We were very blessed to have you today. So I have three questions just quickly. One is, I will start with the very first point you had mentioned, which is, I think in one of your graphs you showed the case fatality rates in much poorer countries is lower. Pertaining to that, the question is it because poorer countries have a younger population, or is this biology? I mean, that is one question. The second one is partly answered with Anu's question, which you answered, which is regarding antibodies being used as therapeutics. So we know very well from the Trump episode that antibody cocktails can work very well against mitigating disease severity. So what is the future, do you think? Will some of the antibodies elicited by these vaccines, will they be characterized and used as therapeutics itself, or companies looking at that possibility as well? And the third final question from me is, I think the most important is the epidemiology of the disease post-vaccination. What is the plan as far as India is concerned? Do you have any idea how the how the surveillance is going to happen? Is it only genomics based, or is it going to be serology based and some combination thereof plus public education and so on?
Yeah. So the thing about case fatality rates, one is we make missing deaths or misclassifying deaths. It's often been seen that in a health system, when you are in the throes of an emergency, your data recording may not be as good as it would be at other times. So that's one possibility. The second is demographic structure, where younger people don't generally develop as severe disease. But to counter that is the fact that we have comorbidities at a younger age. The other is that we have an exposure to other coronaviruses. And certainly in the evaluations that I did of antibody assays, I did not find cross-reacting coronavirus antibodies in a large proportion of the population. But it's feasible that in different parts of the country that may play a role. It may even play a role in terms of seasonality, because corona protection lasts for a relatively short period of time for the seasonal coronaviruses. Finally, it may be the hygiene hypothesis that we live in such a contaminated environment that our bodies have learned that constant inflammation is not a good state to be in. So therefore, when they see something that induces inflammation, they tend to respond less well to it. All of these, if we had, these are all hypotheses, either epidemiological or biological, and worthy of investigation. The monoclonal antibodies question, yes, Regeneron is developing antibodies, Eli Lilly is developing antibodies. We've realized, of course, that a single monoclonal is a bad idea, because that just creates the immune pressure for the virus to evolve. So we need to be looking at combinations of monoclonals, but how many monoclonals do we need, and how frequently would we need to think about switching them? Now that the technologies are established, I think this will give us good proof of principle studies where we can think about doing this in the future. Your last point about epidemiology post-vaccination, I think it's very important to remember that vaccines are not perfect, and 95% efficacy vaccine in the throes of a clinical trial may not be as good when it's actually used in real life. And impact of vaccination depends on the efficacy of the vaccine and the coverage of the vaccine. So if your coverage is not perfect and your vaccine is not perfect, you actually have a large proportion of the population that is not protected. So we are going to need to keep in place test, trace, and isolate. In addition to that, for understanding what is going on, I am a proponent of seroepidemiological studies. The more, the better for understanding what is happening in populations. But to measure the impact of vaccinations, there are a number of different kinds of study designs that allow us to do this. One design that I use for post-vaccination studies is called the test negative design, because that is only dependent on people who have symptoms. And then you look backwards to see whether that person was actually vaccinated or not.
Thank you.
Dr. Pankaj Poddar. Dr. Pankaj Poddar ji.
Yeah, hi, Professor Kang. I'm a physicist, so please excuse me for my lack of basic understanding. So I have one question, and I was reviewing literature for past several months, but it turns out there are 4 or 5 answers to that one question. So I wanted some clarity from you. The question is basically the neurological problem which are reported by the people, like dizziness and cognitive dysfunction, delirium, headache, and loss of sense of smell and taste, etc. So theories are following, like number one is probably the particles are landing into the brain. There was some reports about that, which is highly unlikely because of the, relatively larger size of particle and the blood-brain barrier being there, protecting us. And the second theory was basically whether it is a lack of oxygen. That is a problem. Third theory was the immune response, the body's own immune trigger, which is somehow acting against the basically the cells there. The fourth was like leaky cells, or maybe there may be other or mix of these reasons. What is your, I mean, can you please give us some clarity? After several months now, do we have some clarity? Thank you.
I think biology is complicated and human biology is incredibly complicated. The only thing that I can refer you to is recently there's been a large review of all of the autopsy studies, and none of the studies actually find the virus in the brain. So it looks like this is not direct virus-mediated damage, it has to be indirect. Now, what that indirect damage is, given that we know that there is a lot of endothelial damage that happens, certainly leaky vessels is a possibility, but so is also then an immune response.
Thank you very much. I think the latest MRI studies are going into the same direction which you have pointed out. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Dr. Dastagir. Dr. Dastagir.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor. Very excellent talk. Do you still believe BCG is playing a role in Asian countries?
So I think I was polite about it earlier and said that, there might be an association, it's feasible, but we really need to do the studies to see. I'll stand by that. Ecological studies are weak evidence. If we really want to prove that BCG works, then we need to give BCG to people and follow them up over time. Now, Serum has done a trial where they've done that for healthcare workers. They've used their recombinant BCG vaccines, and I'm told that the results will be available sometime in January. There are also similar studies that are ongoing in Australia, in Germany, in the UK, where healthcare workers have been given BCG and are being followed up. And we should wait for the data from those studies if we want to confirm or deny a role for BCG in protection from infection.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
और कोई प्रश्न पूछना चाहते हैं?
Yeah,
Dr. Ashish Orpe.
Dr. Gopinath wants to.
Dr. Ashish.
Can I ask? Hello, can I ask a question or somebody else?
Sir, आगे बढ़िए.
Yeah. Dr. Gagandeep Kang, thank you very much for the outstanding talk. It was very informative. I have one question. I think you alluded to that in your earlier slides about the probability of a form for discovery of a drug. Do you think, I would like to ask the question, why do you think the drug there's no efforts on developing the drug? Is it difficult for the want of the data? And is it make sense to develop a drug? And if it actually happens, do you think that happening in the foreseeable future?
So I think with our understanding of viruses now, and the ability to have the kind of screening systems that we have now, the high throughput systems assisted by AI, I don't see why we cannot come up with multiple targets. The problem with drug discovery and getting it into clinical application is that drug discovery drug discovery, development, and validation all takes a very long time. This virus is going to be with us for a really long time. Vaccines are not likely to wipe it out. So I think if programs are started or can be started, this is something that is really important and we should try to do it. But you have to look at the competitive landscape, because there may be groups that are much further ahead that are working in the same area.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Gopinathan जी पूछना चाह रहे हैं ना?
Yeah, this is Dr. Gopinath from Dallas Division. Thank you very much for your nice talk. I have a very general question. Are we really ready for next pandemic and to tackle in a effective way? And because your very first slide showed about 30 different epidemics and pandemics, that clearly indicates that we should expect epidemic and pandemic in the next few years very soon. So how maybe we are tackling that?
Actually, I think we got lucky. I know this pandemic seems terrible, but this pandemic actually has a low case fatality rate. You saw that from the graph that I showed you. Other pandemics have other coronaviruses have much higher fatality rates. So for MERS, it's 30%. For SARS-1, it was 10%. Here we are talking about less than 1% of infected people dying of SARS-CoV-2. So I think we've actually been very lucky that this pandemic is a very transmissible virus, and that's a feature of pandemics, but it's not the deadliest of viruses. So you saw how badly prepared we were for this. If we don't do something about it, we are definitely badly prepared for the next one. At least in India, I think we've done some things right, in terms of PPE, indigenization of kits, indigenization of equipment, kind of backward integrating our supply chains. So we've done some things. Have we done everything? No, we haven't, but I don't think any other country has either.
Can you hear me? Chandra here again. Because we are in a committee room, we have no computer raise the hand unless our master allows us. So, actually, quickly, very two quick questions. One, when you made a comment that not so much effort is going on repurposing or drug discovery. I think one challenge today in the chemist space is the ability to screen the new chemical entities in our country. I think most biologists, with all due respect, are very busy in surveillance and vaccine analysis and things that are too busy in those activities. India did not build capacity on high-speed screening. So that needs to be built, I think, and that has to be taken on board so that you have repurposed and new NCs. Maybe you could make a comment on that. And the second quick question is, are there multiple vaccines? And these questions I'm sure you have been asked on the media and many times. Whether one should take multiple vaccines. For example, today I got an access to AstraZeneca. After 6-7 months, I find that my T-cell response or antibodies are low. Now could I go and take a biotech or maybe after? So is it possible to switch around, or we should stick to one mode of action vaccine? So these are my two big questions. Thanks, Gavin.
So for your first question, absolutely, I think we need a strategic approach to drug development, and CSIR is the perfect place to be doing that, to make the investments for when rapid screening, large-scale screening is required. You're the people who should be doing it. So no question about that. The second question about whether you can mix and match vaccines, that's actually been recommended by the UK. Not recommended in the sense of go ahead and take 2 different vaccines, but saying that whatever vaccine is available, take 2 doses of that and it'll be fine. Now, this is not what is recommended by manufacturers, because the manufacturers say take the vaccine as we told you to take it at the interval that we told you to take it. Otherwise, we are not responsible. So that's really a liability question. The question about interchangeability or using different vaccines in a mixed schedule or booster doses with a different class of vaccine, no one has answers that are based on data at the moment. This is speculation, but if we are to think about it and how the immune system responds, if you have a reasonable interval and you think we find that people's antibodies fade over time, I see no reason why you cannot have a different platform being used. These are studies that will need to be done. Right now, what I'm proposing or what I'm saying is an opinion and not fact.
धन्यवाद। समय की कमी है तो सिर्फ हम आखिरी एक क्वेश्चन ले पाएंगे बहुत संक्षिप्त में। डॉक्टर चेतन गाडगिल को सादर आमंत्रित करती हूँ।
Thanks for the nice talk. I have a question about the clinical trial design. So actually two questions. One is that now that we have there is an approved drug, do we still continue with placebo-controlled trials or sham vaccination trials, or do we do head-to-head? And the other is that in the original design itself, do we control for the immunogenic effects of the vehicle, or is it just a sort of vaccine versus no treatment?
Okay. So if we look at, let me take your clinical trial question by telling you what's happening in the US, right? Where Pfizer and Moderna have completed their primary endpoints, they've got the number of cases that they were getting, and there are still people who are in the trial. Moderna decided to unblind and give everybody the vaccine. Pfizer said that we will allow people to continue in the trial until such time their priority group becomes eligible for vaccination, and at that time we will unblind and tell them whether they were in the placebo group or active vaccine group, and if they were in the placebo group, then they can get the vaccine. Using a placebo becomes ethically questionable if you are still recruiting for a trial in a country where a vaccine has been given any form of approval. So this is something that we will have to think about for future vaccine trials. Are you going to do every trial then as a non-inferiority design? And non-inferiority designs require very, very, very large numbers of people, much more than the 30, 40,000 people trials that we have seen now.
Yeah.
Your second question, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on that.
No, that's right. So it was about whether it is just the vehicle, or is it just a sham, or is it no?
So
and also about the numbers actually. So, yeah.
In the viral vectored vaccine, you measure antibody responses to the adenovirus and to the spike protein. And there it seems to make a difference, because we know from the CanSino trial that if you have pre-existing antibodies to adenovirus, then your immune response to the vaccine, the spike protein is lower. So, but for the others, you measure antibody responses directly to the proteins of interest.
So, and one last is that we have clinical trials approved with varying numbers of participants. So is there any guidance on the statistical power, or how much is at least the minimum?
So if you look at the Covaxin trial, they are recruiting 25,800 participants, and their primary endpoint is for 130 cases being counted. If we look at the Moderna trial is 30,000 participants with an expected protocol primary endpoint of 150 cases. The Pfizer trial was 44,000 people, and they expected 164 cases. So you can see that depending, the larger the number of cases, the tighter your confidence intervals, but then the larger the requirement of people in the study. So you take your point estimate, and then you estimate what you will allow for your confidence intervals. That determines your trial size.
Thank you.
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद मैडम। आपने हमारे सभी साइंटिस्ट की बहुत सारे प्रश्नों का जवाब दिया। निश्चित रूप से और भी बहुत सारे प्रश्न होंगे, लेकिन अभी समय की कुछ सीमाएं हैं और हमें उन सीमाओं का पालन करना है। मैं आपको पूरे CSIR NCL परिवार की ओर से बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद देना चाहूँगी, और मैं इसी के साथ आपको धन्यवाद देने के साथ साथ हमारे NCL ऑर्गेनाइजर की भी बहुत तारीफ करना चाहूँगी कि उनकी चॉइस बहुत अच्छी और समसामयिक है, क्योंकि इस समय वैक्सीन को लेकर सभी के मन में हजार हजार प्रश्न उठ रहे हैं, और ये बहुत सही समय पर एक बहुत सही और बहुत उपयुक्त चीफ गेस्ट का उन्होंने चुनाव किया है। और हम सभी बहुत भाग्यशाली कि आपसे इस कार्यक्रम में जुड़ने का, आपको सुनने का मौका मिला। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। और अब बारी है कार्यक्रम की यादगार स्वरूप स्नैपशॉट लेने के लिए। मैं हरिकृष्ण जी से निवेदन करूंगी कि वे स्नैपशॉट ले लें, और आप सभी डिग्नेटरीज से निवेदन करूंगी कि कृपया अपने वीडियोज एक्टिवेट कर लीजिए प्लीज। जी किया है। हरि जी आगे बढ़े।
प्लीज कंटिन्यू।
धन्यवाद। और अब बारी है बहुप्रतीक्षित NCL RF अवार्ड की। तो मैं आपको थोड़ा बताना चाहूँगी कि NCL रिसर्च फाउंडेशन एक नॉन प्रॉफिट ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है जिसकी स्थापना अगस्त 1990 में की गई थी, और जिसका उद्देश्य है NCL में साइंस एंड टेक्नोलॉजी के क्षेत्र में उत्कृष्टता को लाना, प्रमोट करना और प्रेरणादायक वातावरण बनाना। तो जिसमें विभिन्न कैटेगरीज के अंतर्गत विभिन्न प्रकार के प्रेस्टिजियस अवार्ड प्रदान किए जाते हैं। और कार्यक्रम के अगले चरण में मैं सादर आमंत्रित करती हूँ डॉक्टर मगेश नंदागोपाल जी, प्रिंसिपल साइंटिस्ट हैं NCL में, कि वे आगे की कार्रवाई वे संभालें। डॉक्टर मगेश नंदागोपाल जी।
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I have been asked to perform a very pleasant task of announcing the NCL Research Foundation Annual Day Awards for the year 2019-20. And so a few days ago, someone from the NCL Research Foundation reached out to me and said, would you be willing to announce the awards? And I said yes, because it's very rarely you get to do a task which is like entirely pleasant and where you get to celebrate some of your colleagues. We don't do it very often, but I am very happy to be here announcing these awards. So every year on the occasion of the NCL Foundation Day, NCL Research Foundation recognizes our scientists, staff and students who have made a notable difference through their work and research. Before I start announcing the awards, I would like to request Professor Gagandeep Kang and Dr. S. Chandrasekhar to chair the award ceremony. And with the permission of the chairs, I wish to introduce a little bit, I will give you a little bit information about NCLRF. Ms. Chadda pointed out a few things I wish to add to it. NCL Research Foundation is an independent organization. It's a non-governmental body registered as a public, not-for-profit public trust in 1990. The main aim is to motivate and recognize the teamwork and the individual efforts of scientists, staff, and research students, and their contributions towards sustaining the values of NCL, CSIR NCL, which we cherish, such as sustaining excellence in science and technology, contributing and creating wealth in society through science and technology, individual efforts beyond the normal call of duty, and efforts to improve the productivity and efficiency. NCLRF, through several named lectures conducted throughout the year, also honors the men and women who have made NCL proud, and through this keep their legacy alive and pays tribute to their lasting contributions over the years. It is fully supported by donations made by individuals and companies. It is managed by a distinguished board of trustees drawn from academia, industry, and public life. The following awards were selected by a select committee, internal and external committee constituted by the NCLRF. With this introduction, I would move on to announcing the awards. So the first award category that I wish to announce is the NCLRF Scientist of the Year Award, sponsored by Dr. R.A. Mashelkar Endowment Fund for the scientists in the age group below 40 years. This award carries a cash prize of 40,000 plus a certificate of commendation. For the year 2019-20, this award is jointly shared by Dr. Satya Sen and Dr. Nilesh Mali. Dr. Satya Sen for his insightful research to mimic the chemistry of transition metals with main group elements for catalytic transformations, a topic which is not only at the academic forefront but also driven by requirement of the industry and government regulations for developing greener, safer, and more cost-effective chemical processes. Dr. Nilesh Mali has been awarded this award for his research contributions in developing intensified and energy-efficient distillation technologies, namely extractive distillation, reactive distillation, divided wall columns, thermally coupled distillation, and developing a unique multipurpose pilot-scale distillation facility for establishing proof of concept of these systems in continuous mode of operation, and establishing a facility for generating basic vapor-liquid equilibrium. So the next category of awards is the NCL RF Sipla Hamid Award for the Best Process of the Year. This award carries a cash prize of rupees 25,000 plus a citation. This award is jointly shared by the following team: Dr. Sanjay Kamble, Dr. Sunil Bongle, Dr. S.G. Gaikwad, Dr. S.B. Vanjale, Dr. Mr. R. Chandekar, for their efforts towards process development for the production of paracetamol, which is a cost-effective, sustainable, and environmentally friendly process. So the next award I wish to announce is the NCL RF Award for New Initiative taken by R&D Support System. So this award carries a cash prize of 25,000 rupees plus a certificate of commendation. This is jointly shared by the team comprising of Mr. K.D. Deshpande, Mr. Ajit Joshi, Mr. Mukund Bavsar, Mr. Sunil Bagh, Mr. Vinayak Raut, Mr. Deepak Bendale, Mr. M. Shekhar, and Mrs. Pooja Kulkarni for their initiative in erection of a sewage treatment plant using phytorid technology in CSIR NCL premises, which is a greener, environmentally friendly, cost-effective natural treatment process, and also showcasing in-house technology developed by CSIR NEERI to the stakeholders. The next category of award is the NCL RF Individual Merit Award. There are 6 awardees in this category. So the first awardee, this award carries a cash prize of ₹10,000 each, plus the certificate of commendation. So the first awardee is Mr. Sangappa R. Mamadapure for resourcefully managing the activities related to recruitment process of scientific positions, right from the date of advertisement till joining of the candidates. The next award goes to, in this category, goes to Dr. Sunil Bongle for efficiently carrying out responsibilities of analytical lab of the process development lab in CEPT division and being instrumental in developing novel analytical protocols for various R&D projects. The next award in this category goes to Mr. Anil Algadmal for meticulous design, implementation, optimization of azelaic acid pilot plant and for continuous synthesis of deuterated solvent CDCl3. The next award in this category goes to Mr. Ganesh T. Mane for his diligent efforts in maintaining smooth functioning of CSIR NCL guest house and thereby enhancing the image of CSIR NCL among its visiting stakeholders. The next award in this category goes to Mr. K.M. Gaikwad for his hard work, sincerity, and technical support provided for electrical works in laboratory and in the colony. The next award in this category goes to Mrs. Swati Rishi Chaddar for proficiently handling various responsibilities as Hindi officer, such as official translation work, parliamentary committee visits to laboratory, anchoring various laboratory events, and thereby propagating national language among the NCL community. The next award category is the NCL RF Directors Commendation Award. Once again, there are 6 awardees in this category. The first awardee, the award carries a cash prize of ₹10,000 each, plus a certificate of commendation. The first award in this category goes to Mrs. Pooja Kulkarni for skillfully multitasking her role and supervising various responsibilities of CSIR NCL administration and thereby providing effective support to the management of the laboratory. The next award in this category goes to Mr. M.V. Pardeshi for his commitment, hard work, and efficient management of NCL-RF activities uninterruptedly by providing support over 2 decades and also balancing his responsibilities in the office secretariat. The next award in this category goes to Mr. Mohan Suryavanshi for his enthusiasm and industriousness in procurement related to projects of the laboratory and for efficiently assisting all stakeholders in purchase-related regulations. The next award in this category goes to Mr. Gati Krishna Nayak for his keenness and fervor in efficiently handling the activities of NCL Library and resolving associated issues to the satisfaction of NCL scientific community. The next award in this category goes to Mrs. Gracie Matthew for her utmost diligence in handling crucial portfolio of managing confidential reports of PMS, APAR, OAPAR, integrity certificates, and coordinating respective grades of entire regular staff of CSIR NCL. The next awardee is Mr. Naveen Pavitran for his dedication, sincerity, hard work, and efficient management of stores purchase activities. So the last award category is the NCL-RF Directors Commendation Award for a social cause. This award carries a cash prize of rupees 2,000 each plus a certificate of commendation. This award is shared jointly by the team comprising of Professor Ashwini Kumar Nangia, Dr. Subhangi Umberkar, Dr. C.V. Gode, Mr. Atul Mahajan, Mr. S.M. Mane, Mr. Sunil Patel, Flight Lieutenant P.R. Chitnavis, Mr. D.R. Ahire, Mr. S.V. Mohite, Mr. Jayabalan, Mr. Shanmugam, Mr. Rajendra, Mr. Mukesh Gaikwad for the CSIR NCL team's special social cause in preventing Pune citizens and the passing by vehicles on National Highway from inhaling hazardous vapor due to an acid leakage from a tanker accident near Chandni Chowk, Pune on the 27th May 2020, nullifying the damage caused to its residents and thereby enhancing the stature of CSIR NCL. By the way, this was an all-night operation conducted by the CSIR NCL team. If you want to know more, you can Google about this incident and how NCL intervened. So with this, we come to the conclusion of the award ceremony. I wish to congratulate all the awardees on behalf of the NCL Research Foundation and the NCL family at large for pulling through this tough year that we had so far and coming out for the better on the other end of it. Thank you very much and a big congratulations again to everyone. I cede the floor to Mrs. Swati Chadha.
धन्यवाद डॉक्टर मगेश और सभी अवार्ड विनर्स को हार्दिक हार्दिक बधाई। हम आपके उज्जवल भविष्य की और आगे और भी अच्छा कार्य करने की कामना करते हैं। निश्चित रूप से यह आपके कैरियर की लाइफ का एक सितारा है, लेकिन आप सबके लिए कहना चाहूंगी कि सितारों के आगे जहां और भी है, अभी सैकड़ों कारवां और भी है। और इसी के साथ साथ एक बार सबके लिए जोरदार तालियां हो जाए। मैं तहे दिल से सभी के प्रति बहुत बहुत आभार व्यक्त करती हूँ, सभी को बधाई। और इसी के साथ हम आगे बढ़ते हैं कार्यक्रम के अंतिम किंतु महत्वपूर्ण चरण में। वोट ऑफ थैंक्स के लिए मैं सादर आमंत्रित करती हूँ हमारे चीफ साइंटिस्ट और चेयर CEPD माननीय डॉक्टर सुनील जोशी जी को। डॉक्टर सुनील जोशी।
Dr. Shekhar Mande, Dr. Chandrasekhar, invited guests, friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great privilege to propose a vote of thanks at this occasion. On behalf of CSIR NCL, I would like to thank Professor Gagandeep Kang, who has really given us insight into the COVID-19 vaccines and the path forward. As all of us know, like everybody is really scared of the pandemic situation, and we're really happy to know that there is a ray of hope and that the pandemic will come to an end very soon. We are very thankful to you for all the insights which you have given and your experience which you shared with CSIR NCL. I would like to thank Dr. Chandrasekhar Mande, Dr. Shekhar Mande, CSIR, for spending his time. In spite of a very busy schedule, we could really cut out this time and inspired us. And thank you, Dr. Shekhar. I would like to also thank Dr. S. Chandrasekhar, Director ICT, Director NCL, who took all the pains to come to NCL and share the momentous occasion with us. I'm also thankful for him for the guidance, encouragement, and the support which he has extended the last couple of months, and as well as organizing this event. Thank you. I would like to thank NCL Research Foundation because they have given the prizes and the awards to our colleagues. They appreciated the efforts taken by them and their contribution made during the year. Thank you very much, Dr. Tripathi, Mr. Prabhakar and his team for taking all the efforts, evaluating the proposals which you have received. Thanks for those awards. Now, I would like to thank all our lab services, HLS, and IT team, as a publication group. It was not possible to conduct this function without their full support. So I'm really thankful to all of them. And lastly, I would like to thank Dr. Sadda for comparing the Hindi. As usual, she has done a wonderful job. Thank you, Swati. I would like to congratulate all the awardees. Really, we are proud of you. You have made a significant contribution to the NCL, and I hope you continue to contribute more and more. Next, I would like to thank all the guests who have attended this function. Thank you very much.
धन्यवाद डॉक्टर जोशी सर। इस कार्यक्रम को संपन्न करने में आपकी भी बहुत महत्वपूर्ण भूमिका रही है और समय समय पर आपने हमें बहुत सारा मार्गदर्शन प्रदान किया। इसके लिए आपको अनेक अनेक धन्यवाद। और इसी के साथ मैं कार्यक्रम समाप्ति की घोषणा करना चाहूंगी। आप सभी को पुनः एक बार नववर्ष की हार्दिक शुभकामनाओं के साथ जय हिंद।